Many people have asked the question, what if Germany won World War II? I heard that most of what if histories are about Germany winning World War II because this war is in a lot of people's minds. There are still veterans of this war, and this war killed more people in history than any other war. So it makes sense. It defined all of Europe. However, there is a question that a lot of people don't ask. A question that could have happened. What if no one won World War II? What if World War II ended in a stalemate? And that is the question that we are going to answer today. Now, how could this possibly happen? Nuclear research was on Germany's mind. They spent countless man-hours in research trying to discover the atomic bomb. However, the US were able to discover it first, and Germany was defeated. But in this alternate timeline, Germany discovers it earlier, along with the US. It is Operation Barbarossa. Germany pushes further into Russia, pushing them further and further back. Stalin is shaken scared, so are the Russians, but then the siege of Stalingrad happens. The Russians manage to hold, and they start pushing back Germany. Russia thinks they finally are going to defeat Germany, and the United States is preparing an invasion of Italy with England. However, something happens. An atomic bomb is dropped upon Moscow. Stalin and the rest of the Soviet leadership completely collapses. The nuke destroys them entirely. The Soviet Union is defeated, and Germany was able to take what they wanted. However, the United States, Britain, and the rest of the Allies would see this, and they knew what they had to do. The United States offered Germany for peace negotiations, but Adolf Hitler, being cocky, would deny it. However, eventually, though, he would be forced to accept it when the United States would show that they had nuclear weapons too. Germany was scared of nuclear annihilation, and this fear of nuclear annihilation brought them to a scenario where they were forced to sign a peace treaty. Now, what would borders be like? Let's start with Japan. Japan is the most interesting. If Germany developed nukes, most likely I think they still would have been defeated. They would have been pushed back, and Nagasaki and Hiroshima both would have been destroyed to smithereens. However, that's not really a fun scenario. The scenario is, what if World War II ended in a stalemate? Not what if Germany got everything they wanted and Japan was screwed. So let's make things more fun. Japan is able to take the coast of China and the northern territories, along with Indonesia and the Philippines. However, they are stopped and threatened with nuclear annihilation. The Third Reich demands protection for Japan, or they will drop nukes. The United States regretfully agrees, making Japan able to gain this territory. With Japan gaining this territory, there will now be two different Chinas. Nationalist China, Communist China, and Fascist China. Fascist China would be a government pushed by the Japanese government. And Japan would continue to do awful things to the natives, wiping them out and replacing the population with Japanese people. I could imagine many war crimes committed by Japan, considering they already did during World War II. Let's just say, I don't want to get in great detail what Japan would do, because, well, I want to keep my new channel. So, with all this happening, Japan would strengthen their empire and try to be like the Europeans before them. Now let's go to Germany. Germany would, well, sadly continue the horrible treatment of minorities, and they would do it throughout their new empire. They would set up a puppet state in France, Belgium, and the Netherlands, and many other fascist territories. They would also set up Russian puppet states. I can imagine they pushed Russia up to Ukraine, Belarus, and the rest. The rest of it would stay the Soviet Union. However, Germany would pass food laws, starving them to death. I have looked things up, and I've heard that Hitler planned to colonize Russia, like the Americans colonized the Midwest full of the Native Americans. His plan to do this was to set up puppet governments and eventually starve them to death by taking all their food. At first, the puppet governments would lay in what is now known as Ukraine, Belarus, and the Baltics. But eventually, after starvation, they would be replaced with Germans and be fully annexed. But this would take decades upon decades for this to happen. Now let's go to Italy, the next Axis member. Italy is an interesting case. Mussolini wasn't really that confident of a leader. In this scenario, they still would have been pushed out of North Africa. So I could see two things happening. One, people overthrowing Mussolini like they did in our timeline. Sure, he would be able to take parts of Europe, but he didn't really get what he promised. Or two, Mussolini relies so much on the Germans for power that they become a German puppet state. Either way, I think Italy would still remain under Germany's control. Even if they try to overthrow Mussolini, Germany would start to intervene and they would become a direct puppet state. Now, with all that being said, let's get to the Allies. Starting off for the Allies, we have Great Britain. Great Britain had many colonies, such as India and many African territories. These colonies would be under control of Great Britain after the war, and two things could happen. One, the United States and Britain could offer them referendums. They would gain their independence for loyalty to the new United States and UK alliance. NATO, if it would even still be called NATO. Or Britain stays ultra-conservative and ultra-imperialist and they're backed by the United States. Both are extremely likely. And honestly, the United States would have reasons to do both. The first reason is because if Britain is a strong major world power, then they would be easier to stand up against the fascists. So the United States might actually help Britain install imperialism and keep their empire. And this wouldn't spark many wars around the world, like Vietnam, but across many different countries. Eventually, the United States would get tired of this, and the British Empire would eventually collapse. Or two, they give people referendums, which honestly is impossible to predict. Some countries would refuse, some countries would accept, and many countries would be born, and it would be like a mess, just like in our timeline. Now, with all that being said, let's get into the politics of each major country. Starting with the US, the United States became hardcore conservative during Cold War times. True, there were some liberals elected into power, and it's not like the entire state was conservative, but the United States was more conservative than liberal and had many conservatives' ideals, until the Vietnam War changed that. In this alternate timeline, it would be the other way around. You see, even in modern day, the United States is more conservative than most Western countries, and that's because of the Cold War mindset. The Cold War really made the government hate free healthcare and things like that, which many Western countries love. But in this alternate timeline, since we're not fighting against communists but fascists, and fascists are a far-right ideology, the opposite would happen. The United States would become more liberal. Now, it's possible a conservative resurgence would happen if the United States is seen as too weak, but could a liberal government stand up to fascist? Well, yes and no. I do think they have potential, but it's impossible for me to predict what policies or what people or anything would stand up against them. Any political ideology would have a hard time here. And honestly, this world would be so different from our own, it's impossible to predict how the US would act. But I do think they would lean more towards the left than the right. Is that a good or bad thing? Hey, I don't want to get people yelling at me in the comments, so you decide down there for yourselves and leave me out of it. Anyway, with all that being said, let's go towards Britain. British policies would be interesting. Britain could stay ultra-conservative and elect Winston Churchill. You see, Winston Churchill was voted out of office because Britain no longer wanted war after World War II. But considering how they were in a stalemate, and in this alternate timeline, Germany would take over every mainland European country, except for Russia, but they would take great parts of Russia. This would scare Britain, and Britain would be in a conservative, scared mindset, and a far-right scare would immense in Britain, ironically making them more far-right. Imagine the Red Scare in the US, but instead of communists, it's fascists for Britain, and Britain turns more far-right because of this, ironically. And these would shape the policies of Britain and the US, and since the US is more left-leaning, it could cause some troubles down the road. Now, what would happen overall? I think this world would have a major Cold War between three different factions. The fascists, communists, and democratic, semi-democratic. The US would probably still put a few dictatorships here and there, but they wouldn't be far right or far left. They would be more middle ground. How would this go? Well, there's multiple scenarios. One, we destroy each other. The Soviet Union and United States almost destroyed each other several times in our timeline. Two, Japan, Britain both collapse, and Germany and the United States become main enemies as Russia collapses too. But I think I'm done with this scenario. A Cold War scenario between Germany, United States, and Soviet Union is very interesting, but it's impossible for me to predict what would happen. There's many different things that could happen in this timeline, so I want you in the comments to say what you think would happen if World War II ended in a stalemate. Love you all, peace out, and please like, comment, and subscribe so I can become a YouTuber again.